name is David Ponton III. I'm an associate professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Global Studies. I teach courses primarily in Africana Studies, and I'm affiliate faculty of History Department and Gender Sexuality Studies. I've been at USF since 2017. My research is primarily 20th century African American history. I studied the city of Houston to understand the effects of segregation in the post-World War II era, and recently published a book called Houston and the Permanence of Segregation, an Afro-Pessimist Approach to Urban History. My interest in studying Black men actually began with this project, which is about segregation. I at first was working on a shorter article about Black women's experiences of intimate partner violence in the Jim Crow era, because we know so very little about those kind of intimate moments in Black women's lives. And one of the things that disturbed me a little bit was how very little these women were protected, but also how very little the men who were victims of intimate partner violence were even recognized as victims in the first place. And then I started studying the Texas Southern University so-called riot, which was in fact a police riot on campus. And police came on campus and fired thousands of rounds of gunfire into the men's dormitories in particular. And the more that I studied these men and thought about their lives, the more that I saw they had been living under vulnerability for a long amount of time, being chased down by the KKK, one Black man having been tortured by TSU's campus to send a message to student activists. So I wanted to learn more about the complexities of their lives, how they thought about their relationships to each other and to women. And that took me down this path of really thinking more about Black men. And I have to give a shout out to Dr. Tommy Curry, who wrote The Man Not, which really spurred me into thinking about the complexities of gender as gender and its consequences on Black men's lives. Current research project is about Black male vulnerability in the 20th century. This summer I did research in archives in Richmond and Charlottesville, Virginia, and came across some really interesting records about Black men who were accused of violent crimes, found guilty, and then later exonerated with DNA evidence. And a lot of these men so far that I've been studying have also had mental handicaps. So I think there's something there that's worthy of further inquiry that thinks about the ways that race, gender, and sexuality impose themselves on the lives of Black men in ways that we haven't previously thought about, in ways that we thought they're privileged because of their gender. These cases seem to demonstrate that they're actually vulnerable because of their gender. In the process of writing this book, I had a lot of difficulties with how I had been trained to think as a historian, how I've been taught how to approach the archive, because I was hoping to see a kind of development over time. After 1948, the Supreme Court decided Shelley v. Kramer, which really tore down the last legal restriction on desegregation of housing in Houston. And the question that animated my project in the beginning was, what happens after 1948? Does Houston become more or less segregated? And I was surprised actually to find that the city became more segregated once these legal barriers had been torn down. And then when it came to the process of writing the book, I kept pushing to write a story about, well, 1948 was a time. Now we're in, at that point when I was writing, 2017, 2018. And I wanted to say, look, there's stuff that has changed. And on some level, things did change. The lunch counters were no longer segregated in downtown Houston. The airport was no longer segregated. But housing segregation was still and stronger than it had been before. And I had issues with writing a story that didn't have change over time, because that's what historians do. We write about change over time. One of my blind peer reviewers for my book asked a simple question during my process of writing, which was that person had this sense that there was Afro-pessimism within my work, but that I didn't really name it or call myself one. And they asked me, well, how would you think about a historian's approach to Afro-pessimism? And that was what really made me go forcefully into this approach with the book. So this project in one way makes the argument that segregation is permanent. And that is a pessimistic message, but that's not actually the thing that Afro-pessimism is pessimistic about, and it's not the thing that I'm pessimistic about. The thing that Afro-pessimism is pessimistic about are the ways that we are trained to think about the problems in the world. And we have to rediscover how we learned what we know, and then begin to question the very foundations of thought itself. And that's what I encourage my students to do in the classroom, whether they are coming from their social science backgrounds or humanities. I have computer science students and engineering students and pre-health students. The order of the day is to question what it means to be human, to question the very term of humanity itself. I think that is the core, that is the root of Black studies. And once we begin to ask that question, from the perspective of people who have been on the underside of humanity, who have been considered less than human, then we start to see a lot of things in this world are just absurd. Why are kids hungry? Why is housing short? Why do we have war? Why can't we seem to fix the things that from the perspective of people on the underside are fixable? We have the power to do it, but do we have the will to do it? And so part of it is reaching the point of saying the ways that we produce knowledge, something is wrong with that. Something is wrong with the ways that we ask questions and answer them. And that's the pessimistic part. But there's a flip side to it, which is once we realize that we're sort of stuck in this bind, we get to create something new. We get to question the disciplines. We get to question how we're disciplined. And then we get to rewrite the rules. And there's great possibility and there's great hope in that. And so that's the approach that I take in my classroom as well, just sort of leading us all into this existential crisis. We come with assumptions about how the world has to work, and then we learn that it doesn't have to be that way. And out of that, we begin to see absurdity on the one hand, and then possibility on the other hand. We are the Institute on Black Life at USF.